Chapter 13. As soon as Jamie jumped from the log train on Saturday, he said we must leave at once for town. He'd brought part of his lunch, a slab of roast beef on bread, all for me, because he hated that he was eating so well while I had almost nothing. We should buy as much cornmeal as we could carry and a crock of fresh lard, he said. Those beans would be good with cornbread. Baking powder, I said. Dry beans, because string beans would not last long. Salt. Bean seed. Writing paper, sewing supplies. We walked the forest path to town because he said it was quicker. I could barely discern a path, but Jamie seemed sure of himself. The only direction I was certain about was that we were going down. The trees were densely spaced, very large and very old, according to Jamie. A surveyor's mistake had exempted this side of the mountain from the Winkler Company's purchase. So weren't we lucky? I agreed, because he was leading me, holding my hand, helping me avoid low drop-offs and supporting me when I caught my feet in the ground vines that twisted everywhere. Our dark path finally emerged, not onto a street, but to a slope full of the debris of logging, just above the town. With easier footing and sunlight brightening our way, Jamie hurried me along. Saturday was payday, so all the Wood Hicks would be in town. The pay line would be long, and the store would be crowded with women. I was to go there and pick out no more than the both of us could carry and tell Mr. Ramey to jot it down. We crossed the river on a footbridge suspended by cables. A little frightening to me, because some boards were loose, and the bridge swung side to side with our weight. Jamie ran across it like a kid. He was right, the line in the store was very long, but I didn't mind because it gave me time to sneak glances at the other shoppers and make up my mind about the offerings on the shelves and in the baskets, barrels and kegs on the oiled floor. The women chattered to each other like old friends. No one noticed me. The store had everything, not just food, but clothes, garden tools, furniture, shoes, and boots. When it was my turn at the counter, I gave my requests to a clerk who looked no older than Mrs. Bond's nephew. Jamie had said nothing about what I should buy, but I was sure he'd appreciate my prudence. Though I was eager to start on our winter quilt, I asked only for needles, thread, and a pair of scissors, then 5 pounds of cornmeal, a pound of lard, and 2 pounds of salt, a ham shoulder, a tin of lamp oil. My last request was for 3 sheets of writing paper, envelopes, a pen, and a bottle of ink. These items did not cost much, but I hoped Jamie did not think they were frivolous. The clerk assembled everything as I'd asked, then called Mr. Ramey to approve. "Jamie Long's account," I said. Mr. Ramey frowned at me and my purchases, but nodded approval to the clerk. While the clerk jotted everything on Jamie's account page, I wrote a brief note to my uncle. "We are living near Winkler, West Virginia. Please send your letters here." Then I printed his name and the general delivery address for Fargo, paid the penny postage, and asked the clerk to add my envelope to the mail bag. The clerk set down my 2 burlap sacks near the entrance. "Surely you can't carry these very far," he said. "Oh no, my husband is here." Through the open door, I watched Jamie trotting across the street, dodging wagons. He ran up the steps and paused in the doorway. I picked up one of the burlap sacks but set it down again because he signaled me to wait. I stood back from the entrance while he bought tobacco and cigarette papers and a pair of gloves for work. Then he took money from his pocket and settled with the clerk. The clerk had distributed my purchases in the bags so they were nearly equal in weight. But when Jamie came back to me, he rearranged them, putting the heaviest items in one bag. "Now then, let's go home," he said, swinging the heavy bag over his shoulder and using his other hand to guide me out of the store. He'd made no objection to anything I'd bought, so I felt I'd made wise choices. We walked slowly along the street, looking into carts and wagons piled with items for sale. While Jamie looked at guns, I went to the next wagon and sorted through used clothing, rugs, and quilts. Next, we stopped at a box full of newly hatched chicks. 3 pennies each, the boy said. I looked at Jamie. I didn't know if he'd given all his wages to pay our store bill, but I still had a few coins. "My apron has 2 pockets," I said. He nodded. "And my shirt has 2. We'll take 4 chicks." I put a chick in each of my apron pockets, and he put the other 2 in the pockets of his shirt, making bumps on his chest that tempted me to giggle. Having seen other coins in his palm, I drew him back to the wagon with the quilts. "She'll take 20 cents for these 2 old ones," I said. When he frowned, I added, "They'll be filling for 2 new quilts." I could piece cloth to cover them. He put 1 ragged quilt in his sack and 1 in mine. Then, with chicks wiggling in our pockets and the bags slung over our shoulders, we crossed the swaying footbridge and started up the slope toward the forest path. Before we entered the woods, he found walking sticks to ease our climb. I was happy, not just from my experiences in town, but because Jamie was leading our way. We prodded our sticks up through the forest floor, the chicks warm and settled in our pockets, and the sacks straining our shoulders. "We could use a horse," I said, adding a little laugh so my suggestion would not sound serious. Jamie did not reply. I didn't know if we could afford a horse. He hadn't offered to say what he'd paid for our cabin, and I had no idea what money remained from my uncle's gift, nor any sense of Jamie's wages. Now we had baby chicks, but nothing to feed them. For a few weeks, I'd have to give them the cornmeal I'd bought for myself, plus scraps if I had any of those. I knew a horse would be impractical, especially since it would require hay in the winter. Of course, if the chicks turned out to be roosters, they'd soon be food. The boy selling the chicks had said he was pretty sure they were all hens, but since everybody wanted hens, I expected he'd say that. Neither Jamie nor I could tell the difference. I was tired from our trek up the mountain that evening, but Jamie worked until dark. He braced the chicken house roof with a squared-off log I'd found at the edge of our woods, then nailed a piece of tin across the torn places in the tar paper. The chicks weren't big enough to turn out, so that night we kept them in the cabin in a wooden box near the stove. Jamie said the camp cook kept chickens, and he might part with an unused scrap of chicken wire for a pen where our chicks could safely scratch on the ground. "But not until they've got their pin feathers," I said. He acknowledged I was right. Our sweetest times outside were the ones just before sundown, when we sat on our porch with a glass of cool spring water and spoke of all we hoped to do. He said he loved the sound of my voice reading Evangeline. As for me, I could have listened to him sing all day. Before he left that Sunday, he sang Farewell, and we tried to waltz in the lumpy grass. Farewell, farewell to you who would hear. You lonely travelers all, the cold north wind will blow again. The winding road does call. "This is a sad song," I said, stumbling in his arms. "Ma said the best songs have a bit of sadness to them." Jamie's voice grew tender when he spoke of his mother, a wonderful singer. I didn't try to sing with Jamie because my cousins had let me know I couldn't carry a tune. Sunday afternoon, when we heard the train coming up the mountain, he gave me a quick kiss, settled his cap farther down on his head, and ran to the tracks. A flat car of loggers appeared, sitting on crates and on the deck of the car, and they reached down and helped him jump up beside them. When he turned and sat down, I waved, but perhaps he did not see, because he did not wave back. Then the train was gone. Remembering our hours together filled the next days and nights. He'd admired my work in the garden but laughed at my scarecrow and warned the crows would be back as soon as the ears of corn filled out. I knew that. "If you pick too soon, the ears will mold," he said. I knew that too. There was much to be happy about. Of all the places we'd been in our short married life, this place was best because it was ours. Alone again, I cut and sewed pieces for the new quilts. Jamie had said he might not be able to slip away from work, so I should not expect him to come until the following Saturday. Thursday night, however, I woke to a knocking on the door. Mayrose, Mayrose, unbar the door!" We had a feverish hour together, then he was gone again. The next day was gray and rainy, so the chicks and I stayed inside with a small fire in the stove and a light in the lamp so I could see to make my stitches. My quilt coverings had no special pattern, cut as they were from the goods I had on hand, but I was proud of them. I'd thought we might go to town the next Saturday, but Jamie had work in mind, a hog lot, and as soon as he jumped off the log train, he set to work on it, staking out a space at the edge of the woods to be enclosed with boards and barbed wire and a little house for the weather. He'd brought no chicken wire, But he had another a present from camp, an entire loaf of light bread. Since I had no flour or yeast, the bread was a delight. Each of our moments together were like cream rising to the top of a pitcher of milk, the best part of everything. I told myself the time without him was a test of character. He said we would not live apart forever. The little chicks were a blessing, and I guarded them like a mother hen, sitting nearby while they learned to scratch and peck in the dirt. Our 2 hens were still providing 1 egg every day, and I had beans and potatoes from the garden, seasoned with a small sliver of ham. I worried about winter. Jamie was working so hard for us both at his job and on weekends that I did not complain. The following Saturday, when he left nearly as soon as he got home to go to his brother's house. "I need to borrow the horse so I can haul up some barbed wire," he said. "Chicken wire, too." Russell had a litter of pigs, and Jamie was sure he'd give us one. I tried not to show how sorry I was to be left alone again.